This establishment caters to a certain caliber of clientele.
If someone had told the morning staff at Heritage Trust Bank that the quiet black woman in designer jeans was about to fire them, all they would have laughed. And maybe that was the cruelest part, because for exactly 10 minutes they treated her like she was invisible, while she controlled more money than their entire branch combined. Before we dive into this story that changed everything, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below. I want to know who's part of this community fighting for respect and dignity. And if you believe that respect should never depend on your appearance, hit that subscribe button and share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Because in exactly 10 minutes, everything you think you know about power, prejudice, and justice is about to shift right here on the marble floors of Heritage Trust Bank. By the time this story ends, you'll understand that sometimes the quietest voice in the room holds the most power. And sometimes justice doesn't come with sirens and handcuffs. It comes with a signature on a termination letter. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Heritage Trust Bank at 2847 Prosperity Boulevard in downtown Dallas, Texas. At exactly 9:47 a.m. on this Tuesday, March 15, 2025, the air inside the grand lobby hummed with the quiet confidence of old money and new ambition. Crystal chandeliers caught the light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, creating dancing patterns across walls lined with oil paintings of the bank's founding fathers. The sound was distinctive here. Designer heels clicked against polished stone in measured rhythms. Hushed conversations floated between gilded columns as clients discussed million-dollar deals in voices trained never to rise above a whisper. The scent of leather briefcases and expensive cologne mixed with the sterile cleanliness of a place where money was both made and moved with surgical precision. Two distinct seating areas divided the lobby like an unspoken class structure. To the right, plush burgundy leather chairs surrounded a mahogany table decorated with current issues of Forbes and Wall Street Journal. A small brass plaque read, "Premium Services Clientele." To the left, standard bank chairs faced a wall-mounted television broadcasting financial news with a simple sign indicating general banking services. Behind the main counter, tellers worked with practiced efficiency, their movements choreographed by years of processing transactions that ranged from Social Security deposits to corporate acquisitions. The premium services desk sat elevated on a small platform, its brass nameplate catching light like a beacon private banking and investment services. This was Heritage Trust Bank's flagship branch serving Dallas's financial elite with the discretion and exclusivity they demanded. Annual revenue flowed through these doors at $847 million, making it one of the most profitable locations in the Southwest region. Every detail, from the imported Italian marble to the handcrafted bronze door handles, whispered the same message. This was a place for people who belonged, for those who understood their station, for clients who looked the part. The morning rush was just beginning, and the lobby filled with its usual parade of power suits, expensive watches, and inherited confidence. But in exactly 13 minutes, this sanctuary of financial privilege would become the stage for a reckoning that would echo far beyond these marble walls. Dr. Valeria Richmond paused just outside the revolving doors of Heritage Trust Bank, checking her reflection in the polished brass. At 42, she carried herself with the quiet confidence that came from building an empire from nothing and knowing exactly who she was, regardless of who others expected her to be. She wore dark designer jeans that fit perfectly, paired with a cream cashmere sweater that spoke of understated elegance rather than flashy wealth. Her natural hair was styled in an elegant twist that required no apology and made no concessions to anyone's expectations. A simple gold watch and small pearl earrings completed her look, professional but approachable, powerful without being performative. What the morning staff at Heritage Trust couldn't know as she stepped through their doors was that Dr. Valeria Richmond had built Richmond Capital Holdings from a single rental property purchased with her college graduation money into a $12.8 billion portfolio spanning real estate technology investments and community development funds across 17 states. Born Valeria Williams in Oak Cliff, the daughter of Samuel Williams, a sanitation worker who rose at 4 a.m. every morning for 37 years to provide for his family. Her mother, Rose Williams, cleaned office buildings in downtown Dallas, including this very bank during Valeria's childhood. While other kids played after school, Valeria did homework in corporate lobbies, watching her mother empty trash cans and mop floors for people who never looked at her face. Samuel Williams had dreams beyond sanitation routes. In 1987, when Valeria was 4 years old, he walked into Heritage Trust Bank with a business plan for a small cleaning service complete with financial projections handwritten on notebook paper and a firm handshake. He was denied a $15,000 loan without the courtesy of a full review. The loan officer, a man whose nameplate read Assistant Manager, told Samuel that people like you should stick to realistic expectations. Samuel never tried again. He worked his sanitation route until his heart gave out at 58, 3 years before Richmond Capital Holdings reached its first billion in assets under management. He died believing the system would never change, that doors would always remain closed to people who looked like his family. But he had raised someone who believed doors were meant to be opened, and if they wouldn't open, they could be purchased. Today, Valeria carried a leather portfolio containing documents that would finalize Richmond Capital Holdings' acquisition of a controlling 67% stake in Heritage Trust Bank's parent company. The purchase, completed just Friday afternoon, made her the largest private investor in an institution that employed over 12,000 people across the Southwest. But today wasn't about paperwork or corporate governance. Today was about something far more personal. For weeks, Richmond Capital's compliance team had received anonymous complaints about discriminatory practices at this specific branch. Stories of minority customers being interrogated, delayed, denied services, or simply treated as unwelcome in a place their tax dollars helped ensure. Valeria didn't believe in corporate investigations conducted from corner offices. She believed in seeing truth with her own eyes. So she had scheduled a 10:00 a.m. meeting with Regional Director Kenneth Harper under the pretense of discussing contract renewals. What she hadn't mentioned was that she would arrive early dressed as herself rather than as Dr. Richmond's CEO and primary stakeholder. She wanted to see how Heritage Trust treated customers who looked like her father. She wanted to witness firsthand whether the culture that had crushed Samuel Williams's dreams still lived in these marble halls. As she approached the front counter portfolio in hand, calm and professional, Valeria Richmond wasn't just conducting a test. She was completing a promise made to a man who had died believing change was impossible. In exactly 3 minutes, she would discover whether her father had been right. Behind the polished mahogany counter of Heritage Trust Bank's Premium Services section, the morning staff moved through their routines with practiced precision, each playing their role in maintaining the institution's reputation for exclusivity and discretion. Isabella Crawford Whitman stood at the center of it all, the branch manager who had transformed Heritage Trust's flagship location into the most profitable in the region. At 38, Isabella was the product of Connecticut boarding schools and Yale University's business program, though she preferred to let her results speak rather than her pedigree. Her platinum blonde hair was styled in a perfect chignon that never moved even during the longest days, and today she wore an emerald silk blouse beneath a black Armani suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Isabella's red Louboutin stilettos clicked against the marble with authority as she surveyed her domain. A diamond tennis bracelet caught the light when she gestured, and everything about her presence suggested someone accustomed to deference. She had climbed the banking ladder not through connections alone, but through an unwavering commitment to what she called maintaining standards. In Isabella's view, Heritage Trust served a particular caliber of clientele, and preserving that exclusivity was what kept their profit margins so impressively high. Her signature phrase, delivered with a smile that never reached her eyes, had become legendary among staff. This establishment caters to a certain caliber of clientele. She believed in elegant prejudice, the kind that hid behind policy and procedure, rather than crude language discrimination delivered with perfect grammar and expensive perfume. Miguel Santos, the 33-year-old assistant manager, occupied the complex middle ground between ambition and conscience. Born in El Paso, he was the first in his family to attend college working nights at a warehouse to pay for his business degree. Miguel had joined Heritage Trust 3 years ago with genuine enthusiasm for helping people achieve their financial goals, but daily compromises had worn thin his initial idealism. Isabella valued Miguel because he followed orders without question. But lately her orders had begun to conflict with the values his parents had raised him with. His wife, Carmen, a teacher at a nearby elementary school, frequently asked why he seemed troubled after work. Miguel had never told her about the subtle ways certain customers were discouraged, the extra verification procedures, the convenient computer malfunctions that happen more often for some people than others. Brittany Walsh, 26, operated the premium services counter with the nervous energy of someone perpetually afraid of making mistakes. A recent graduate from a local business college, she carried student loan debt that made her deeply grateful for her position at Heritage Trust. Brittany had been trained to recognize appropriate clients for premium services, though no one had ever explicitly defined what that meant. She had learned through observation, watching Isabella's reactions, noting which customers received warm smiles and which were directed elsewhere. The pressure to meet quarterly goals made Brittany eager to please her supervisors, especially Isabella, who controlled performance reviews and advancement opportunities. She had absorbed the unspoken rules about maintaining Heritage Trust's brand standards without fully understanding the human cost of those standards. David Morrison, the 45-year-old security chief, brought military precision to his civilian role. A former Army MP who had served 2 tours overseas, David approached his position at Heritage Trust with the same discipline he had applied to base security in Afghanistan. His job was to follow protocols, maintain order, and protect the institution's assets and reputation. David rarely questioned the orders he received from management. In his military experience, the chain of command existed for good reasons, and civilians who challenged authority usually created more problems than they solved. His radio crackled with constant updates from corporate security, and his presence in the lobby was designed to communicate that Heritage Trust took protection seriously. Rachel Torres, 29, represented the newest hire in customer relations, having joined Heritage Trust only 6 weeks earlier. A graduate of UT Dallas with a degree in communications, Rachel had been excited to begin her career in financial services, believing she could help people navigate complex banking relationships and achieve their goals. But Rachel's enthusiasm had been steadily dampened by what she observed during her training period. She noticed patterns in how different customers were treated, discrepancies that made her uncomfortable, but which she had been told were simply risk management protocols. As the newest employee, Rachel felt powerless to challenge established procedures, but her discomfort grew daily. These 5 individuals, each carrying their own motivations and blind spots, were about to encounter a customer who would test every assumption they had made about power privilege and their roles in perpetuating or challenging institutional prejudice at 9:47 a.m. 7. They were simply doing their jobs. By 10:00 a.m., they would be participants in a reckoning that would change their understanding of what those jobs actually required. Valeria Richmond approached the premium services counter with measured steps her portfolio held confidently, but not aggressively. The morning light streaming through the tall windows illuminated her professional appearance as she crossed the marble floor, her presence creating barely a ripple in the lobby's carefully maintained atmosphere. Brittany Walsh stood behind the elevated counter organizing paperwork with mechanical precision. Her attention was focused on a spreadsheet displaying quarterly performance metrics numbers that would determine whether she qualified for the year-end bonus that would help with her student loan payments. She had been trained to greet customers within 30 seconds, but the training had also included subtle guidance about prioritizing certain types of interactions. "Good morning," Valeria said politely, her voice carrying the professional tone she had perfected through decades of boardroom negotiations. "I have an appointment with Mr. Harper." Brittany's eyes remained on her computer screen for another 15 seconds before she looked up with a practiced smile that faltered slightly when she took in Valeria's appearance. The designer jeans and cashmere sweater didn't fit the template Brittany had been taught to recognize for premium services clients. Where were the pearls, the structured blazer, the obvious signals of inherited wealth and social position? Ma'am Brittany set her tone, shifting to something more cautious. "You'll need to use the standard services line." She gestured vaguely toward the general banking area without lifting her hand, fully a dismissal that looked polite but felt cold. Valeria's expression remained calm, though something flickered behind her eyes. She had expected this moment, but experiencing it still carried the sting of familiarity. "I don't think that will be necessary. My appointment was scheduled in advance. He should be expecting me." The word appointment finally brought Brittany's full attention to bear. She turned from her spreadsheet with a look that mixed skepticism with barely concealed irritation. Her examination of Valeria was thorough but quick, taking in the natural hair, the absence of obvious luxury brands, the quiet confidence that didn't announce itself with expensive accessories. "He's in a meeting," Brittany replied, though no such meeting appeared on her scheduling system. "And he doesn't take walk-ins." Her voice carried a finality that suggested the conversation should end there, that reasonable people would understand their place and move accordingly. "I'm not a walk-in," Valeria said gently, maintaining her professional composure. "I'm Dr. Richmond." Brittany's slight laugh came out before she could stop it, the kind of sound that revealed more than she intended. "Right. I'm sure. Look, if you're here about a loan application, there's a different desk for that." She pointed toward the general banking area with the same dismissive gesture, this time with less effort to disguise her impatience. From his position near the lobby's security station, David Morrison noticed the interaction. His military training had taught him to observe body language, to detect tension before it escalated into problems. What he saw was a customer who wasn't moving when directed a situation that could develop complications if not managed properly. David approached with the measured stride he had used when patrolling military installations, his presence designed to communicate authority without immediate threat. His uniform was pressed, his badge polished, his radio positioned visibly on his shoulder. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying the weight of protocol, "you're holding up the line. You either take a number or step aside." The lobby's atmosphere shifted subtly as other customers became aware of the developing situation. A well-dressed elderly woman glanced over from the premium seating area with mild annoyance. A businessman checking his Rolex looked up from his phone, his expression suggesting that efficiency was being compromised by someone who didn't understand the system. But not everyone watched with indifference. Near the general banking area, James Murphy, a 34-year-old tech entrepreneur who had built 2 successful startups, recognized something familiar in the interaction. James had experienced similar moments in venture capital offices, tech conferences, and client meetings where his appearance and age didn't match expectations for serious business discussions. He discreetly activated his phone's camera, positioning it to capture the scene while appearing to check messages. His Instagram account, @TechEntrepreneur_Dallas, had built a following of 50,000 by documenting both the successes and challenges of building businesses in Texas. Today, he sensed, might require documentation. Valeria looked around the marble lobby, taking in the surveillance cameras, the pamphlets promising equal opportunity, banking the subtle segregation between premium and standard services. The weight of decades settled on her shoulders as she recognized the same dynamics that had crushed her father's dreams in this very building. "Fine," she said quietly, her voice steady but carrying an undertone that suggested calculation rather than defeat. "I'll wait." She moved toward a chair near the window, pulling out her phone as she settled into the standard seating area. Her fingers moved quickly across the screen, typing a 4-word message. "I've arrived." "Observing." The response came back in less than a minute. "Understood. Proceed." As Valeria sat in the morning sunlight portfolio on her lap, she began what would become the most expensive waiting period in Heritage Trust Bank's history. Around her, the routine of financial privilege continued, unchanged staff and customers moving through their practiced roles, unaware that they were being evaluated by someone who could rewrite the rules entirely. The clock on the wall showed 9:52 a.m. In exactly 8 minutes, everything would change. But for now, Valeria Richmond waited patiently, watching and remembering her father's face on the day he came home empty-handed from this same marble lobby 38 years ago. The morning light continued to stream through Heritage Trust Bank's tall windows as Valeria Richmond settled into her chair, but the atmosphere around her had begun to shift in ways both subtle and deliberate. What started as dismissive indifference was about to evolve into something far more calculated and cruel. Isabella Crawford Whitman emerged from her corner office like a predator who had sensed disturbance in her territory. Her emerald silk blouse caught the light as she moved across the marble floor with practiced authority, red stilettos clicking in measured rhythm. She had built her reputation on maintaining Heritage Trust's exclusive atmosphere, and the scene developing at Brittany's counter demanded her immediate attention. "Is there a problem here?" Isabella's voice carried across the lobby with crystal clarity, pitched perfectly to sound concerned, while simultaneously drawing attention to the disruption. "We can't have disruptions during business hours." Her smile was as polished as her appearance, warm on the surface, but cold beneath the kind of expression perfected in boardrooms, where difficult decisions were made with pleasant faces. Brittany looked up with visible relief, grateful for backup from someone who could handle situations above her pay grade. "This woman claims to have an appointment with Mr. Harper, but I don't see anything on the schedule." Isabella approached Valeria's chair with the measured steps of someone conducting an inspection. Her examination was theatrical, designed as much for the audience of other customers as for the woman she was evaluating. She took in the designer jeans with an expression that suggested confusion, the cashmere sweater with barely concealed skepticism, the leather portfolio with the kind of scrutiny usually reserved for suspicious packages. "May I see your identification and account information?" Isabella's request sounded reasonable, even helpful, but carried an undertone suggesting that such documentation would likely prove insufficient. When Valeria calmly handed over her platinum card and driver's license, Isabella held them with 2 fingers as if concerned about contamination. "These documents seem questionable," Isabella announced, her voice pitched to carry across the lobby. "We've had issues with forgeries lately. Identity theft is unfortunately common in this area." She paused meaningfully, allowing the implications to settle. Individuals attempting to access accounts fraudulently often target establishments like ours. The accusation hung in the air like smoke, acrid and impossible to ignore. Other customers began to pay closer attention, some with curiosity, others with the kind of discomfort that comes from witnessing something that feels wrong but unsure how to respond. Isabella moved to the premium services counter with Valeria's documents, making a show of examining them under the desk light. "Brittany, please run these through our verification system, and call security while you're at it." Her voice was loud enough for everyone in the lobby to hear a public announcement disguised as an internal communication. "Security to premium services," came Brittany's voice over the intercom system, crisp and official. "Potential unauthorized access. Possible fraudulent documentation." David Morrison's radio crackled to life with updates from the corporate security center. Protocol required immediate response to potential fraud alerts, and his military training demanded quick action to neutralize threats before they escalated. He approached Valeria's chair with increased purpose, his presence now clearly focused and potentially threatening. "Ma'am," David's voice carried military authority. "Attempting to access accounts fraudulently is a federal crime. I'm going to need you to remain in that chair while we verify your identity." His hand moved to his radio, ready to escalate to local law enforcement if the situation required additional intervention. The lobby's atmosphere had transformed completely. What began as routine morning business had become a public spectacle, with Valeria Richmond positioned at the center as the suspected criminal. Conversations stopped. Newspapers lowered. The normal hum of financial activity gave way to the kind of charged silence that precedes either violence or revelation. From his position near the general banking area, James Murphy felt his stomach tighten with recognition. He had witnessed similar scenes in different settings, always following the same pattern: assumption, accusation, escalation, humiliation. His phone was already recording, though he kept it positioned discreetly to avoid drawing attention to himself. Near the premium seating area, Sarah Jensen, a lifestyle blogger with a growing TikTok following, noticed the commotion. Sarah had built her platform on documenting authentic moments of social interaction, particularly those that revealed underlying tensions in everyday situations. Something about the scene developing before her triggered every instinct she had developed for content that mattered. Sarah discreetly activated her phone's live stream function, positioning the camera to capture the interaction while appearing to check her messages. Her followers, numbering nearly 75,000, were accustomed to her morning banking routine, but today they would witness something none of them expected. Isabella returned from the counter with Valeria's documents, her expression grave with manufactured concern. "I'm sorry, but our system is having difficulty verifying these credentials. The computer shows several inconsistencies that require further investigation." What kind of inconsistencies? Valeria's question was calm, almost academic, as if she were discussing someone else's situation entirely. "Account access patterns that don't match the profile associated with these documents," Isabella replied smoothly, having perfected the language of official-sounding discrimination. "We're required by federal law to investigate any irregularities that might indicate fraudulent activity." The explanation sounded reasonable to anyone not familiar with the flexibility of banking verification systems, how easily technical difficulties could be manufactured when convenient, how subjective irregularities could become when filtered through institutional bias. Miguel Santos watched from his position at the assistant manager's desk, feeling increasingly uncomfortable with the direction of the interaction. His 3 years at Heritage Trust had taught him to recognize when verification procedures were being selectively applied, but challenging Isabella's judgment would require courage he wasn't sure he possessed. Perhaps Isabella continued, her voice carrying across the lobby. "It would be better if you visited one of our community banking locations. They might be better equipped to handle your particular banking needs." The suggestion was delivered with a smile wrapped in the language of helpfulness, while clearly communicating where certain customers belonged. The pattern was complete now: dismissal, escalation, accusation, and finally direction toward the exit. But Valeria Richmond remained seated, portfolio on her lap, expression calm, hands folded, waiting for something the Heritage Trust staff couldn't yet imagine. At 9:57 a.m., Isabella Crawford Whitman believed she had successfully managed a potential disruption and maintained the exclusive atmosphere that made Heritage Trust profitable. She had no idea that in exactly 3 minutes, her entire understanding of power, privilege, and proper procedure would be turned upside down. As the tension in Heritage Trust Bank's lobby reached a crescendo, the digital age transformed what might have once been a private humiliation into a public reckoning broadcast in real time to thousands of viewers across social media platforms. James Murphy's entrepreneurial instincts had been shaped by years of recognizing moments that mattered. His tech entrepreneur Dallas Instagram account had built its following by documenting both the victories and struggles of building businesses in Texas. But what he witnessed unfolding at Heritage Trust transcended business content. This was about basic human dignity, and his 50,000 followers needed to see it. He discreetly switched to Instagram Live, angling his phone to capture the scene while maintaining the appearance of checking messages. His voice was low but clear as he began narrating. "Y'all, I'm at Heritage Trust Bank in Dallas right now, and I'm watching something that has my blood pressure through the roof. This black woman is being treated like a criminal for trying to conduct business. Comments began flooding the live stream immediately. What's happening exactly? Is this really happening in 2025? Someone needs to intervene. Get closer so we can see better. This is why I don't bank with Heritage. James adjusted his position slightly, ensuring his camera captured both Valeria's composed demeanor and Isabella's theatrical performance. The manager is claiming her documents are fraudulent. She's calling security. This woman hasn't raised her voice, hasn't been aggressive, literally just tried to keep an appointment. Near the premium seating area, Sarah Jensen's lifestyle and social justice TikTok account had initially gone live to document her morning routine, but her content had pivoted the moment she recognized discrimination happening in real time. Her followers were accustomed to her thoughtful commentary on social issues, but they had never seen her document injustice as it unfolded. Dallas friends, I need y'all to witness this, Sarah whispered into her phone, her Texas accent becoming more pronounced as her emotions intensified. I'm at Heritage Trust Bank on Prosperity Boulevard, and this is exactly what we've been talking about, banking. While black is apparently still a crime in 2025, her viewer count climbed rapidly, 5,000, then 15,000, then 25,000 people watching live as Isabella continued her performance of bureaucratic discrimination. The comments section exploded with outrage support and demands for action. Post this to Twitter too. Someone call the news. What bank is this again? Everyone needs to see this. I'm screen recording in case they delete it. Sarah's voice carried clearly as she continued her narration. The branch manager is a white woman in designer clothes treating this customer like she's automatically suspicious. Y'all, this woman looks professional, calm, respectful. But apparently that doesn't matter if you don't look like what they expect money to look like. At a table near the window, Mrs. Carmen Rodriguez, a 67-year-old retired teacher, watched the scene with the weight of recognition. She had banked at Heritage Trust for over 20 years, had watched similar interactions unfold too many times to count, but had never seen anyone document what was happening. Her granddaughter Maria, a college sophomore studying social justice, had taught her about the power of viral videos to create change. Mrs. Rodriguez discreetly opened her phone's camera app, her hands trembling slightly with both age and anger. She had experienced enough discrimination in her lifetime to recognize it in any language, any setting, wrapped in any level of politeness. From behind the teller counter, Rachel Torres felt her stomach churning with familiar anxiety. 6 weeks into her employment at Heritage Trust, she had witnessed 3 similar scenes, each following the same script: professional minority customer, sudden verification problems, security involvement, eventual departure. She had been told these were standard risk management protocols, but watching them unfold always felt wrong. Rachel began taking notes on her computer, not because anyone had asked her to, but because her communications degree had taught her the importance of documenting patterns that might need to be addressed later. She noted timestamps recorded the sequence of escalation, captured direct quotes from Isabella's performance. The digital documentation was expanding beyond individual social media accounts. Screenshots of James's Instagram Live were being shared across Twitter with hashtags like #HeritageDiscrimination and #banking while black. Sarah's TikTok was being duetted and stitched by other creators, each adding their own commentary and expanding the reach. A local news producer scrolling through trending Dallas hashtags during her morning social media scan noticed the spike in Heritage Trust-related content. Within minutes, she had contacted field reporters and begun monitoring the live streams for potential breaking news coverage. Heritage Trust's corporate communications team received their first notification at 9:58 a.m., an alert system they had installed to monitor social media mentions of their brand. What started as routine morning monitoring quickly escalated to crisis communications protocol as they watched their flagship branch become the center of a viral discrimination incident. Meanwhile, Valeria Richmond sat quietly in her chair, observing not just the discrimination directed at her, but the digital ecosystem that was documenting and amplifying every moment. She understood that whatever happened next would be witnessed by thousands, recorded by multiple sources, and preserved permanently in the digital record. The clock showed 9:59 a.m. In exactly 1 minute, Kenneth Harper would arrive with his entourage, and the carefully documented narrative of Heritage Trust's discriminatory culture would collide with the reality of who they had been discriminating against. But the internet had already rendered its verdict, and no corporate explanation would be able to erase what thousands of people had witnessed in real time. Isabella Crawford Whitman stood at the center of Heritage Trust Bank's marble lobby, like a conductor orchestrating a symphony of institutional prejudice. At 9:58 a.m., she believed herself to be in complete control of the situation, managing a potential disruption with the sophisticated discrimination that had made her so successful in maintaining Heritage Trust's exclusive reputation. Her emerald silk blouse caught the morning light as she moved with practiced authority, every gesture calculated for maximum impact. The red Louboutin stilettos clicked against the marble in deliberate rhythm as she approached Valeria's chair, her diamond tennis bracelet sparkling with each movement of her perfectly manicured hands. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step away from our premium services area," Isabella announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate compliance. Her tone was professional, even helpful on the surface, but carried an unmistakable undertone of command that brooked no argument. She gestured toward the general banking area with a movement that appeared polite but felt dismissive, a practiced motion that communicated hierarchy without crude language. Perhaps our community banking representatives would be better positioned to assist with your particular needs. Isabella's performance was masterful in its sophistication. She had learned to discriminate with designer clothing and perfect grammar to exclude with policy rather than profanity to maintain plausible deniability while making her message absolutely clear. This was prejudice refined by Ivy League education and expensive training discrimination that hid behind institutional procedure and corporate protocol. "I understand you may have traveled here with certain expectations," Isabella continued, her voice projected to reach every corner of the lobby. "But Heritage Trust maintains specific standards for our premium services division. These standards exist to ensure all our valued clients receive the level of service they deserve in an appropriate environment." The language was carefully chosen, each word defensible in any complaint or review, but the meaning was unmistakable. Isabella had perfected the art of discrimination that could survive legal scrutiny while achieving its intended effect. Brittany Walsh watched from behind the premium services counter, notebook in hand, documenting everything for what she assumed would be a routine incident report. She had seen Isabella handle similar situations with the same polished professionalism, always managing to maintain Heritage Trust's reputation while achieving the desired outcome. David Morrison positioned himself slightly behind and to the right of Isabella, his military training making him acutely aware of positioning and tactical advantage. His radio crackled softly with updates from corporate security, but the situation appeared to be progressing according to standard protocol for managing unwelcome individuals. "Now I understand this may be frustrating." Isabella's voice took on a tone of manufactured sympathy, "but surely you can understand our position. Heritage Trust has built its reputation on maintaining certain atmospheres for our clientele. It's really in everyone's best interest if you utilize services more suited to your background and experience." Miguel Santos felt his chest tighten as he listened to Isabella's performance. 3 years of working under her management had taught him to recognize when appropriate service matching was code for something much less palatable. His wife Carmen's voice echoed in his mind from their conversation the night before Miguel. "If you see something wrong and do nothing, you become part of what's wrong." But challenging Isabella required courage that could cost him his career, his health insurance, his family's financial stability. Miguel remained at his desk documenting the interaction according to protocol, hating himself for his silence, but unable to find the strength to speak. From her live stream position, Sarah Jensen's voice carried clearly to her growing audience. Y'all are watching textbook institutional racism. This is how discrimination works in 2025. No slurs, no obvious hostility, just polite prejudice wrapped in policy. Her viewer count had climbed past 40,000, with comments flooding in faster than she could read. This is disgusting. Someone help that woman. Post this everywhere. I'm calling the bank right now. This manager needs to be fired immediately. Isabella, unaware of the digital documentation happening around her, continued her performance with growing confidence. I'm sure you understand that different institutions serve different communities. There are several excellent banks in this area that might be more culturally aligned with your expectations and needs. She paused meaningfully, allowing her words to settle throughout the lobby. Sometimes the most respectful thing we can do is acknowledge when services might be better provided elsewhere. James Murphy's Instagram Live had reached 35,000 viewers, his commentary sharp with controlled anger. This is what we're talking about when we say the system is rigged. This woman is being politely told she doesn't belong, and it's all being disguised as customer service. At her window table, Mrs. Rodriguez whispered into her own phone, her voice trembling with decades of accumulated pain. My granddaughter, this is what Abuela has been trying to tell you. This is how it really works. Isabella's final gesture was a masterpiece of sophisticated exclusion. She reached into her jacket pocket and retrieved an elegant business card, extending it toward Valeria with a smile that looked gracious but felt condescending. Here's the contact information for Community Trust Financial down the street. They have a wonderful team that specializes in serving diverse populations. I'm sure they'll be much more helpful with whatever brought you in today. The business card hung in the air between them like a gauntlet thrown down, a final insult wrapped in the language of helpfulness. Isabella's smile never wavered as she waited for Valeria to accept defeat and move toward the exit, completing another successful management of an inappropriate customer. The clock on the wall showed 9:59 a.m. Isabella Crawford Whitman stood at the peak of her performance, believing she had masterfully maintained Heritage Trust's exclusive standards while avoiding any actionable discrimination. She had no idea that in exactly 60 seconds, every word she had spoken would become evidence in her own termination, broadcast live to tens of thousands of witnesses who would ensure her sophisticated prejudice received the viral attention it deserved. With the clock showing exactly 9:59 a.m., Isabella Crawford Whitman prepared to deliver what she believed would be the final act in her sophisticated drama of exclusion. She had managed countless similar situations with the same polished professionalism, and today would be no different. Her diamond tennis bracelet caught the morning light as she reached for her phone with practiced authority. I'm going to need to make a quick call to verify your appointment, Isabella announced, her voice carrying across the marble lobby with the confidence of someone who controlled every variable in the equation. She dialed a number from memory, though everyone watching assumed she was calling Kenneth Harper's office. Instead, Isabella was calling her assistant's direct line, a number that would allow her to conduct a one-sided conversation that would sound like official verification while actually being completely fabricated. It was a technique she had perfected over years of managing difficult situations. Kenneth. Yes. It's Isabella. She spoke into the phone, her voice projected clearly so everyone in the lobby could follow the conversation. I have someone here claiming to have a 10:00 appointment with you. She paused, dramatically nodding as if listening to detailed instructions. I see. Yes, that's what I suspected. Another pause, longer this time, with Isabella's expression growing more serious. Emergency board meeting moved up to 9:30. Of course, I understand completely. Isabella's performance was flawless. Each pause timed perfectly, each expression calculated to communicate official disappointment rather than personal prejudice. No rescheduled appointments until next week. I'll let her know. Thank you for clarifying. She ended the call with a sigh that suggested genuine regret rather than manufactured dismissal. I'm terribly sorry, but Mr. Harper sends his apologies. An emergency board meeting was moved up to 9:30 this morning and his entire day has been rescheduled. He won't be able to accommodate any appointments until next week at the earliest. The lie was so smoothly delivered that even some of the staff believed it. Brittany Walsh made notes in her scheduling system, assuming she would need to help reschedule legitimate appointments that had been disrupted by corporate emergencies. But Isabella wasn't finished. She reached into her leather portfolio and retrieved a laminated document that looked official and intimidating. I'm also going to need to inform you about some recent policy updates regarding enhanced security protocols. The document was real part of Heritage Trust's updated security procedures, but Isabella was about to misapply it in ways that would provide legal cover for discrimination while appearing to follow corporate policy. Due to increased incidents of identity theft and financial fraud in this area, Isabella read from the laminated policy, Heritage Trust has implemented enhanced verification requirements for all new account access and high-value transaction requests. She looked up from the document with an expression of professional concern. These protocols require additional documentation and background verification that can take several business days to complete. Given the irregularities we've identified with your documentation today, these enhanced procedures would definitely apply. David Morrison's radio crackled with what sounded like urgent updates from corporate security, though the static made it impossible for others to understand specific details. In reality, David was receiving routine morning briefings about parking lot security and building maintenance, but the timing made it seem related to the current situation. I'm also required to inform you, Isabella continued, her voice taking on the formal tone reserved for official warnings, that continuing to request access to accounts or services after being informed of verification requirements could be construed as attempted unauthorized access under federal banking regulations. The threat was delivered with the same polished professionalism that characterized Isabella's entire performance, wrapped in legal language that sounded authoritative while being largely meaningless. But the message was clear: leave now or face potential criminal charges. From his live stream position, James Murphy felt his jaw clench with recognition. Y'all, this is how institutional discrimination works. It hides behind policy uses. Official language makes the victim responsible for the oppression they're experiencing. His viewer count had reached 45,000 with comments exploding across the screen. This is absolutely disgusting. Someone needs to help her. I'm sharing this everywhere. This bank is about to learn today. Corporate needs to see this. Sarah Jensen's TikTok Live had climbed past 50,000 viewers, her voice tight with controlled anger as she documented each step of Isabella's performance. This is masterclass discrimination, y'all. Professional prejudice with perfect grammar and expensive clothes. Miguel Santos watched from his desk as Isabella reached the crescendo of her authority play, feeling sick with the knowledge that he was witnessing something fundamentally wrong while lacking the courage to challenge it. His phone buzzed with a text from his wife. "How's your day going, mi amor?" He couldn't bring himself to respond. Isabella's final move was to step closer to Valeria's chair, positioning herself to loom authoritatively while maintaining enough distance to appear non-threatening. "Ma'am, I need you to understand that Heritage Trust takes security very seriously. Continuing to loiter on our premises after being informed that your business cannot be conducted today will require me to contact local law enforcement." She paused, allowing the threat to settle throughout the lobby. "I'm trying to help you avoid what could become a very unpleasant situation. The best thing for everyone involved is for you to gather your belongings and visit us again when you have the proper documentation and procedures in place." The clock on the wall clicked to 10:00 a.m. Isabella Crawford Whitman stood at the peak of her authority, having deployed every tool in her arsenal of sophisticated discrimination. She had policy, procedure, official documentation, security protocols, and legal threats, all supporting her position. What she didn't have was any understanding of who she was actually speaking to, or awareness that in exactly 30 seconds, every word she had spoken would become the foundation for her own professional destruction. The revolving doors at Heritage Trust's entrance began to turn, and everything Isabella believed about power, privilege, and proper procedure was about to be utterly dismantled. The revolving doors of Heritage Trust Bank began their slow rotation at exactly 10:00 a.m., and the atmosphere in the marble lobby shifted with the precision of stage lighting dimming before a dramatic revelation. The morning sun cast long shadows across the polished floor as footsteps approached with the measured cadence of authority, each sound echoing off the gilded columns like a drumbeat announcing the arrival of judgment itself. Kenneth Harper entered first, his usually confident stride betraying a subtle nervousness that came from 30 years of banking experience and an acute awareness that this particular meeting would determine the future of his career. Behind him walked Patricia Morrison, Senior Vice President of Regional Operations, her expression serious as she reviewed documents on her tablet. Following closely came Marcus Webb, Legal Counsel, and Jennifer Liu, Chief Compliance Officer, their presence indicating that today's business extended far beyond routine contract renewals. The small entourage moved with the purposeful efficiency of corporate executives who understood that time was money and meetings were investments that required precise returns. Their expensive suits and confident bearing immediately commanded attention from everyone in the lobby, the kind of presence that suggested important decisions and significant consequences would flow from whatever business brought them here. Isabella Crawford Whitman felt a surge of validation as she recognized the regional director's arrival. Her performance had been perfectly timed, the disruptive customer situation managed just before Kenneth's entrance. She straightened her emerald silk blouse and prepared to greet the executives with the professional warmth that had built her reputation as Heritage Trust's most successful branch manager. But Kenneth Harper's expression changed the moment his eyes found Valeria Richmond, sitting quietly in the standard banking area portfolio on her lap, hands folded, expression calm but alert. The color drained from his face with such speed that Patricia Morrison followed his gaze to understand what had caused such visible distress. Dr. Richmond Kenneth whispered the words carrying across the marble lobby like a prayer offered too late for salvation. The recognition in his voice was immediate and absolute, tinged with the kind of panic that comes from realizing that catastrophic mistakes have already been made and cannot be undone. Isabella's confident expression faltered as she processed Kenneth's reaction. The formal title, the tone of recognition, the sudden shift in atmospheric pressure that suggested she had misunderstood something fundamental about the situation developing around her. Valeria Richmond stood with the same measured grace she had displayed throughout the morning, her movement suggesting infinite patience, finally rewarded with appropriate attention. "Mr. Harper?" she replied, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room she chose to enter. "You're 3 minutes early for our meeting," she continued, consulting her watch with the casual precision of someone whose time was measured in millions of dollars per minute. "I appreciate punctuality." Her tone was professional, pleasant even, but carried undertones that suggested the previous 20 minutes had been observed, documented, and evaluated according to standards Kenneth Harper was just beginning to understand. The silence that followed was total and crushing, the kind of quiet that occurs when entire world views collapse simultaneously across multiple people who suddenly realize they have been operating with dangerously incomplete information. Isabella stood frozen, her mind racing to process what Kenneth's recognition implied about the woman she had spent 20 minutes dismissing, humiliating, and threatening with legal consequences. Brittany Walsh went stiff as a mannequin behind the premium services counter, her pen hovering motionless above paperwork that suddenly seemed utterly insignificant. David Morrison's military training kicked in, his posture shifting from enforcement readiness to protective alert, as he realized he had been positioning himself as a threat to someone who might be deserving of protection rather than suspicion. Miguel Santos felt his stomach drop as pieces fell into place, his 3 years of uncomfortable compromises suddenly crystallizing into a moment of absolute clarity about what he had been participating in and what consequences might be approaching. From his live stream position, James Murphy's voice carried across the digital sphere to 52,000 viewers. Y'all, something just changed. The whole energy in here just shifted. This regional director looks like he's seen a ghost. Sarah Jensen's TikTok Live had climbed to 68,000 viewers, her commentary sharp with growing excitement. The executives just arrived and they recognize her. Oh my God, this woman is about to flip this entire script. Valeria stepped forward with the confident stride of someone who had built empires from nothing and understood exactly how power operated in every dimension. Her heels made soft contact with the marble as she moved toward the center of the lobby, positioning herself where every person present could see and hear what was about to unfold. Allow me to introduce myself properly to those who felt I didn't exist 20 minutes ago. She began, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the lobby, from the premium seating area to the teller stations to the security desk where David Morrison stood in growing dread. She turned slowly, making eye contact with every employee who had participated in her dismissal, her gaze lingering on Isabella with particular attention. I am Dr. Valeria Richmond, founder and CEO of Richmond Capital Holdings. The words settled over the lobby like a blanket of snow, muffling all sound except the soft hum of air circulation and the distant murmur of traffic outside. Patricia Morrison's tablet slipped in her hands. Marcus Webb's legal pad fell to his side. Jennifer Liu stopped mid-stride as the implications cascaded through her compliance-trained mind. As of last Friday afternoon, Valeria continued, her voice steady and measured. Richmond Capital Holdings completed acquisition of a controlling 67% stake in Heritage Trust Financial Services. She paused, allowing the mathematics to settle into every mind present. Which means, Ms. Crawford Whitman, that every policy you cited, every procedure you followed, every threat you made was ultimately authorized by my signature. Isabella's diamond tennis bracelet caught the light as her hand moved unconsciously to her throat, her perfect composure cracking like expensive porcelain dropped on marble. The sophisticated discrimination that had been her trademark was about to be evaluated by its ultimate target, and the reversal was so complete that her mind struggled to process the new reality. Kenneth Harper stepped forward, his voice carrying the desperation of someone watching their career flash before their eyes. Dr. Richmond, please, this must be a misunderstanding. Our staff follows strict protocols for customer service excellence. Valeria's smile was patient but contained no warmth. Mr. Harper, I've been observing your staff's protocols for the past 20 minutes. I've experienced your customer service excellence firsthand. She gestured toward the chair where she had been forced to wait. The experience has been enlightening. The lobby had become a courtroom, and judgment was about to be rendered by someone who held absolute authority over everyone present. But for Valeria Richmond, this moment wasn't about revenge. It was about completing a promise made to a man who had died believing that systems never change, that doors remain closed, and that dignity is reserved for people who look like they belong. Today, she was about to prove him wrong. Dr. Valeria Richmond moved to the center of Heritage Trust Bank's marble lobby with the deliberate precision of a surgeon preparing to operate on a diseased institution. The morning light streaming through tall windows illuminated her calm expression as she opened her leather portfolio, retrieving documents that would transform everything every person present understood about power, accountability, and consequence. Before we proceed with our scheduled meeting, Mr. Harper, Valeria's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to boardrooms where billion-dollar decisions were made with quiet words and absolute finality. I believe we need to address some immediate personnel matters that have come to my attention. She withdrew a single sheet of paper, holding it with the same care a prosecutor might handle the key evidence in a capital case. Ms. Crawford Whitman, please step forward. Isabella's red Louboutin stilettos clicked against the marble with less authority than they had carried 20 minutes earlier. Her emerald silk blouse, perfectly pressed that morning, now seemed somehow diminished as she approached the woman she had spent considerable effort dismissing from the premises. Ms. Crawford Whitman. Valeria's voice remained professionally neutral, though every person in the lobby could sense the weight of judgment behind her words. In the past 20 minutes, you have violated Heritage Trust's stated commitment to equal service, our federal compliance requirements, and basic standards of human decency. She consulted the document in her hands with the precision of someone reading charges in a courtroom. You fabricated verification problems with my documentation. You manufactured a false appointment cancellation. You threatened legal action based on fictional policy violations. You directed me to leave the premises based solely on your assessment of my appearance and your assumptions about my financial status. Isabella's mouth opened to offer explanation or defense, but Valeria continued without pause, her voice steady and implacable. Your employment with Heritage Trust Bank is terminated effective immediately. The words fell like a gavel, final and absolute. Security will escort you from the building within the next 5 minutes. Your access to all Heritage Trust systems and properties is permanently revoked. Kenneth Harper stepped forward, his voice carrying the desperation of damage control. Dr. Richmond, perhaps we should discuss this privately. Ms. Crawford Whitman has been one of our most successful managers, and I'm sure we can address any concerns through proper channels. Valeria turned to him with the patient expression of someone explaining simple mathematics to a child. Mr. Harper, this is the proper channel. I am the majority stakeholder. My concerns are being addressed exactly as they should be. She moved to David Morrison, whose military posture had gradually shifted from enforcement readiness to something approaching attention as he realized his position in the developing situation. Mr. Morrison, Valeria's voice carried no personal animosity, only the cold evaluation of professional performance. You responded to a fraudulent security alert by positioning yourself to intimidate a customer who had committed no violation of any actual policy. You prepared to escalate to law enforcement based on fabricated concerns rather than verified threats. David's training had taught him to accept responsibility when operations went wrong, but this level of wrongness extended beyond anything his military experience had prepared him for. Your security clearance is permanently revoked, Valeria continued. Please surrender your badge radio and any other Heritage Trust property to Mr. Harper immediately. The methodical nature of the dismissals was more devastating than anger would have been. Each termination was delivered with the same professional courtesy that Isabella had used to disguise her discrimination, but with the crucial difference that Valeria's authority was absolute, and her evidence was unassailable. From his live stream position, James Murphy provided commentary to 74,000 viewers whose numbers continued climbing. This is what accountability looks like when it's delivered by someone with actual power. No committees, no investigations, no lawyers finding loopholes. Just consequences. Sarah Jensen's TikTok had reached 89,000 viewers, her voice tight with excitement. Y'all, we are witnessing history. This is what justice looks like when the people who deserve it actually have the power to deliver it. But Valeria wasn't finished. She turned to Brittany Walsh, whose notebook had fallen forgotten to the counter as she watched her colleagues' careers end with surgical precision. Ms. Walsh, Valeria's voice carried a different tone now, one that suggested evaluation rather than judgment. You followed orders from a supervisor who was violating both company policy and federal law. Your position is not terminated, but you will report to our corporate training center Monday morning for mandatory education in anti-discrimination procedures and customer service excellence. Brittany's relief was visible, though tempered by the understanding that her career at Heritage Trust would forever be marked by this morning's events. Your probationary period will extend for 6 months, during which your interactions with customers will be monitored and evaluated according to the highest standards of professional service, regardless of customer appearance, background, or perceived financial status. Miguel Santos approached Valeria's position with visible nervousness, understanding that his 3 years of uncomfortable compromises were about to be evaluated by someone who had witnessed their ultimate consequence. Mr. Santos, Valeria's voice carried a different quality now, something that might have been recognition rather than condemnation. You observed discriminatory behavior and failed to intervene. However, our review of your employment record shows consistent professional service and multiple instances where you have advocated for customers facing unusual delays or verification requirements. Miguel's surprise was evident as Valeria continued. You are promoted to interim branch manager effective immediately. Your first responsibility will be implementing comprehensive anti-discrimination training for all remaining staff and establishing new procedures that ensure every customer receives identical service regardless of any factor other than their actual banking needs. The reversal was so complete that Miguel struggled to process what had occurred. In the space of 30 minutes, he had gone from fearful accomplice to senior manager of an institution owned by the woman he had helped discriminate against. Rachel Torres, who had spent the morning documenting everything she witnessed, found herself face-to-face with the person whose treatment she had recorded with growing discomfort. Ms. Torres, Valeria's voice carried approval that surprised everyone listening. Your documentation of this morning's events shows both professional integrity and personal courage. You are promoted to Customer Advocacy Coordinator, a new position responsible for ensuring that every customer concern is addressed promptly and fairly. The transformation was complete. Now careers ended and begun, authority redistributed, and an entire institution restructured in the time it might take to conduct a routine transaction. Kenneth Harper stood in the center of the reorganized lobby, understanding that his own evaluation was yet to come, and that everything he had built during his banking career now depended on how he responded to the next few minutes of conversation with a woman whose patience he had exhausted and whose authority he had underestimated catastrophically. Dr. Valeria Richmond stood in the center of Heritage Trust Bank's transformed lobby, surrounded by the aftermath of decisions that had taken 30 minutes to make but would reshape an entire institution permanently. The morning light continued to stream through tall windows, but everything it illuminated had fundamentally changed in ways that would ripple far beyond these marble walls. Kenneth Harper, Patricia Morrison, and the corporate executives formed a semicircle around her, their expressions ranging from respectful attention to barely concealed panic as they waited to understand what institutional changes would flow from the individual accountability they had just witnessed. Mr. Harper, Valeria's voice carried the authority of someone who had built empires from nothing and understood exactly how institutional change occurred. Heritage Trust's discriminatory practices extend far beyond this morning's performance. Our compliance review conducted over the past 6 weeks has identified patterns that require immediate and comprehensive correction. She opened her portfolio to reveal documents that represented weeks of investigation analysis and legal preparation. Customer service ratings among minority clients are 47% lower than average. Loan approval rates show statistical disparities that cannot be explained by creditworthiness or collateral. Wait times for premium services vary by an average of 12 minutes depending on customer appearance and perceived social status. Patricia Morrison's tablet shook slightly in her hands as she processed the implications of data that had apparently been compiled without corporate awareness evidence that suggested litigation, regulatory intervention, and public relations catastrophe. Effective immediately, Valeria continued, her voice steady and implacable. Heritage Trust Bank operations will be suspended at this location pending complete institutional review. All current customer accounts will be transferred to our Midtown Central branch with full service continuation and no penalty or delay. The announcement hit the remaining staff like a physical blow. Suspension meant investigation review, meant uncertainty, and transfer meant that the profitable flagship branch that had generated $847 million annually would be stripped of its customer base while fundamental changes were implemented. Our corporate compliance team will conduct interviews with every employee, Review every customer complaint filed in the past 3 years and audit every denied application or delayed transaction that shows any statistical correlation with customer demographics. Marcus Webb. Legal counsel stepped forward with the cautious precision of someone navigating a minefield. Dr. Richmond, while we absolutely support thorough compliance review, complete suspension might be excessive for addressing what could be isolated incidents requiring targeted training rather than institutional overhaul. Valeria's smile carried no warmth as she regarded the lawyer who was attempting to minimize what thousands of social media viewers had witnessed in real time. Mr. Webb. When institutional discrimination is broadcast live to 70,000 viewers and documented by multiple sources, it ceases to be an isolated incident. It becomes evidence of cultural failure that requires cultural reconstruction. She gestured toward the phones, still recording throughout the lobby the witnesses who had documented every moment of Isabella's sophisticated discrimination and the consequences that had followed. This morning's events are not aberrations to be managed through training. They are symptoms of institutional bias that requires surgical removal. Jennifer Liu, Chief Compliance Officer, recognized the legal and regulatory implications cascading through Valeria's announcements. Federal Banking Oversight Civil Rights Division involvement and Securities Exchange Commission review would follow naturally from documented discrimination at a federally insured institution. Our immediate priority, Valeria continued, is ensuring that every Heritage Trust customer receives service that reflects their actual banking needs rather than employees' assumptions about their appearance, background, or social status. This will require new policies, new training, new management, and new accountability measures that make discrimination impossible rather than simply discouraged. Miguel Santos, still processing his promotion from complicit employee to interim manager, found the courage to ask the question that had been building in his mind. Dr. Richmond, what exactly do you need from us to make this right? Valeria's expression softened slightly as she recognized the first request for constructive action rather than damage control. Mr. Santos, I need you to help me build the kind of bank my father would have been proud to enter. A place where every customer is treated with dignity, regardless of how much money they appear to have or what neighborhood they come from. She moved to the window where she had been forced to wait, looking out at the Dallas skyline where her father had worked his sanitation route for 37 years while dreaming of businesses he would never be allowed to build. Heritage Trust will become a model for equitable banking, she announced, her voice carrying the weight of personal mission alongside corporate authority. We will establish a $50 million community investment fund specifically for minority-owned businesses that have been denied conventional financing. We will create partnerships with local colleges for financial literacy programs. We will implement transparent complaint systems with external oversight. The scope of transformation was breathtaking, extending far beyond personnel changes to comprehensive institutional reconstruction. This wasn't damage control or public relations management. This was revolution delivered through corporate authority. Most importantly, Valeria concluded, her voice carrying across the lobby to every person present. Heritage Trust will never again be a place where someone's daughter sits in the waiting area because her father was told he didn't belong here. Never again will appearance determine service. Never again will assumptions about who deserves respect influence who receives it. The promise was both personal and institutional, individual and institutional, carrying the weight of generational change delivered through quarterly reports and policy manuals. Kenneth Harper understood that his career now depended entirely on his ability to implement changes he had never imagined necessary, guided by standards he was just beginning to understand for a population he had never adequately served. The transformation of Heritage Trust Bank had begun, but its completion would require far more than this morning's dramatic reversals. It would require daily commitment to principles that Valeria Richmond was prepared to enforce with the same authority she had used to reshape this lobby in 30 minutes. The marble lobby of Heritage Trust Bank had become something unprecedented in its 70-year history, a place where accountability had arrived with surgical precision, reshaping careers and redefining institutional culture in real time. As the immediate shock of terminations and promotions settled, the human cost and potential of Valeria Richmond's intervention began to reveal itself through the faces and voices of those who would carry its legacy forward. Isabella Crawford Whitman gathered her personal belongings from her corner office with the mechanical movements of someone whose entire identity had been stripped away in minutes. Her Hermes purse, family photographs, and Yale University diploma would be packed into a cardboard box and escorted from the building by the same security personnel she had commanded just an hour earlier. The emerald silk blouse that had projected such authority that morning now seemed like a costume from a play that had ended badly. Her hands trembled slightly as she removed her Heritage Trust nameplate from the mahogany desk, the brass surface reflecting a career that had built its success on sophisticated exclusion, finally meeting someone with the power to demand inclusion. Isabella's phone buzzed constantly with notifications from social media platforms where her discrimination had gone viral, her carefully cultivated professional image now permanently associated with institutional prejudice, broadcast to hundreds of thousands of viewers. The irony was inescapable. Isabella had built her reputation on maintaining Heritage Trust's exclusive atmosphere, and that exclusivity had ultimately excluded her from the institution she had served so successfully. Her sophisticated discrimination had met its match in someone with more sophistication and infinitely more power. David Morrison surrendered his security badge, radio, and Heritage Trust identification to Kenneth Harper with the crisp efficiency his military training demanded. But his eyes carried the weight of understanding that his career in financial security was effectively over. No institution would hire someone terminated for discriminatory enforcement, and his 20-year service record was now permanently marked by 30 minutes of following orders that violated everything his oath to protect and serve was supposed to represent. As he walked through the lobby toward the exit, David paused to look at Valeria Richmond, who had returned to the same chair where he had threatened her with legal consequences for attempting to conduct legitimate business. The reversal was so complete that it challenged his fundamental understanding of authority, hierarchy, and justice. Miguel Santos stood behind his new desk, formerly Isabella's corner office, trying to process the transformation from complicit bystander to institutional leader in less time than most people took to complete routine transactions. His phone had buzzed 3 times with messages from his wife, Carmen, but he hadn't found words to explain what had occurred or how their family's financial situation had dramatically improved through his proximity to discrimination. He had lacked the courage to challenge. The promotion carried immense responsibility, implementing anti-discrimination training for staff who had been trained to discriminate, establishing new protocols that prioritized dignity over profit margins, and rebuilding customer relationships damaged by years of subtle but pervasive bias. Miguel understood that his success would be measured by Heritage Trust's ability to become the kind of institution that welcomed everyone, rather than serving select populations with manufactured courtesy. Rachel Torres reviewed the documentation she had compiled during the morning's events, understanding that her notes would become the foundation for policy changes that could affect banking practices far beyond Heritage Trust's Dallas location. Her promotion to Customer Advocacy Coordinator represented more than career advancement. It was recognition that individual courage could catalyze institutional change when supported by leadership with both authority and commitment to justice. The viral documentation continued expanding across digital platforms, with James Murphy's Instagram Live reaching 127,000 viewers before ending, and Sarah Jensen's TikTok surpassing 200,000 views within 2 hours of the confrontation. Comments ranged from celebration of accountability to demands for similar reviews at other financial institutions, with users sharing their own experiences of banking discrimination and calling for industry-wide examination of customer service practices. Heritage Trust's corporate communications team worked frantically to manage the crisis, but found themselves in the unusual position of explaining how their majority stakeholders' termination of discriminatory employees actually represented positive institutional change rather than internal chaos. Press releases were drafted, legal statements prepared, and executive leadership briefed on events that had unfolded too quickly for traditional crisis management protocols. Kenneth Harper spent the afternoon on conference calls with Heritage Trust's board of directors, regulatory compliance officers, and legal counsel, explaining how a routine contract renewal meeting had revealed discriminatory practices so egregious that immediate terminations were necessary to prevent federal investigation and potential criminal liability. His 30-year banking career now depended entirely on his ability to implement changes he should have initiated years earlier. The customer impact was immediate and visible. Mrs. Carmen Rodriguez, who had witnessed decades of similar discrimination in silence, approached Miguel Santos to express gratitude for changes that would ensure her granddaughter would never experience the humiliation she had watched that morning. Other minority customers, aware through social media that Heritage Trust's culture had shifted dramatically, began calling to schedule appointments they had avoided for years. But the most profound aftermath was personal, rather than institutional. Valeria Richmond sat in her car in Heritage Trust's parking lot, calling her mother, Rose Williams, to share what had occurred in the same lobby where Rose had cleaned floors while Valeria did homework 30 years earlier. Mama Valeria's voice carried emotions she had contained throughout the morning's confrontation. "I went to Daddy's bank today, the one that told him no, and I made sure they understand that no isn't an answer they get to give people like us anymore." Rose Williams, now 73, and retired from her cleaning service job, listened to her daughter describe the transformation of a place that had symbolized exclusion for their family since Valeria was 4 years old. The conversation lasted 47 minutes, moving through tears, laughter, and the kind of healing that occurs when justice arrives decades later than it should have, but exactly when it's needed most. As afternoon shadows lengthened across Heritage Trust's marble lobby, the institution began operating under new leadership, new policies, and new commitments that would be tested daily by every customer interaction, every loan application, and every moment when employees chose between inclusion and exclusion. The immediate aftermath was complete, but the real work was just beginning. The late June sun cast different shadows across Heritage Trust Bank's marble lobby, illuminating transformation that had become measurable, documented, and permanent in ways that extended far beyond the dramatic personnel changes of March 15th. Under Miguel Santos's leadership, the flagship branch had evolved from a symbol of institutional exclusion to a model for equitable banking practices that was attracting attention from financial institutions across the Southwest. Customer satisfaction ratings had climbed from 67% to 94%, representing the highest scores in Heritage Trust's corporate history and ranking the Dallas location among the top-performing branches in the region. But the numbers only hinted at deeper changes that were visible in daily operations staff interactions and community relationships that had rebuilt themselves around principles of dignity rather than discrimination. The physical space reflected new priorities, with barriers between premium and standard services removed entirely, creating an open floor plan where every customer received identical attention regardless of their apparent financial status. The intimidating bronze plaques that had segregated clientele by perceived wealth were replaced with simple directional signs that guided visitors to appropriate services based on their actual banking needs, rather than employees' assumptions about their social position. Miguel Santos had discovered unexpected talent for leadership that emerged when institutional pressure to discriminate was replaced with institutional support for inclusion. His quarterly reviews showed loan approval rates that had increased 40% among minority applicants while maintaining identical credit standards, proving that discriminatory practices had excluded qualified customers rather than protecting institutional interests. The mandatory anti-discrimination training that Valeria Richmond had required evolved from defensive compliance exercises to genuine education about unconscious bias, customer service excellence, and the economic benefits of inclusive banking practices. Staff members who had initially resisted the changes began reporting higher job satisfaction as they discovered that treating customers with dignity created better working relationships and improved business outcomes. Rachel Torres had transformed the newly created Customer Advocacy Coordinator position into a comprehensive feedback procedure that tracked service quality across all demographic categories, identifying potential discrimination before it could escalate to the patterns that had characterized the branch's previous culture. Her monthly reports showed 0 discrimination complaints for the first time in Heritage Trust's documented history, a record that represented both improved training and cultural transformation. The $50 million community investment fund that Valeria had established began producing measurable economic impact throughout Dallas's underserved neighborhoods. Local entrepreneurs who had been denied conventional financing found access to capital that allowed them to expand businesses, create jobs, and build wealth within communities that had been excluded from traditional banking relationships. Maria Gonzalez, a 34-year-old single mother, opened her catering business with a $75,000 loan that had been denied by Heritage Trust twice before March 15th, but approved unanimously by the new lending committee in April. Her success enabled her to hire 8 employees and cater events for companies that had never considered minority-owned vendors, creating economic opportunities that extended far beyond her individual business. The financial literacy programs established through partnerships with local colleges served over 200 community members in their first quarter, teaching banking basics, credit management, and investment strategies to populations that had been historically excluded from wealth-building opportunities. The programs were conducted in both English and Spanish, recognizing that language barriers had contributed to the isolation that made discrimination possible. Heritage Trust's transformation attracted national attention with Harvard Business School, developing a case study titled "When Accountability Meets Authority, Institutional Change Through Stakeholder Intervention," that examined how individual courage combined with corporate power could restructure discriminatory practices within months rather than decades. The Federal Banking Commission cited Heritage Trust's Dallas branch as a model for compliance with anti-discrimination regulations, noting that measurable changes in service quality across demographic categories demonstrated how institutions could exceed regulatory requirements while improving business performance. But the most significant transformation was cultural rather than procedural. Staff members began sharing stories about customers they had previously dismissed or discouraged, understanding how their assumptions had prevented them from recognizing business opportunities while perpetuating harmful stereotypes. The morning meetings that Isabella Crawford Whitman had used to reinforce exclusive standards became collaborative sessions where employees shared successful inclusive service experiences and problem-solved challenges to providing excellent customer service across all populations. Brittany Walsh completed her probationary period with performance evaluations that ranked her among Heritage Trust's top customer service representatives, having discovered that treating every customer with respect and professionalism was less stressful than maintaining the complex social calculations required for sophisticated discrimination. Her student loan payments became manageable through performance bonuses earned by exceeding service quality targets rather than meeting demographic exclusion quotas. The viral social media documentation of March 15th continued generating conversations about banking discrimination throughout the financial services industry, with other institutions implementing policy reviews to avoid similar public accountability. James Murphy's Instagram account grew to over 200,000 followers as he documented positive changes at Heritage Trust and similar transformations at other Dallas businesses, creating a platform for celebrating institutional progress alongside exposing continued discrimination. Sarah Jensen parlayed her viral TikTok documentation into a diversity and inclusion consulting business, working with corporations across Texas to identify and eliminate discriminatory practices before they could generate legal liability or public relations disasters. Her success demonstrated how individual witnesses to discrimination could become agents of change when equipped with platforms to share their documentation. The ripple effects extended beyond Dallas, with Heritage Trust's corporate headquarters implementing similar anti-discrimination training and accountability measures at branches throughout the Southwest region. Quarterly reports showed improved customer satisfaction, increased loan originations, and enhanced community relationships that translated directly into improved financial performance for the entire Heritage Trust network. By the 3-month anniversary of Valeria Richmond's intervention, Heritage Trust Bank had become an institution that welcomed Samuel Williams's memory rather than perpetuating the discrimination that had crushed his dreams. The transformation was comprehensive, measurable, and permanent changes that would outlive every person who had participated in creating them. On a humid Tuesday afternoon in late June, exactly 3 months after the morning that changed everything, Dr. Valeria Richmond pushed through the revolving doors of Heritage Trust Bank, carrying the same leather portfolio, but entering an institution that had been fundamentally transformed by the consequences of underestimating who deserved respect and who possessed the power to demand it. Miguel Santos approached with genuine warmth, his confidence reflecting 3 months of leadership that had discovered unexpected strength in creating inclusion rather than maintaining exclusion. Dr. Richmond, welcome back. I wanted to personally thank you for the opportunity to help rebuild what Heritage Trust could become. The lobby bore no resemblance to the segregated space where Valeria had been forced to wait in March. Families of all backgrounds conducted business at service desks without barriers. Elderly customers received patient assistance regardless of their appearance, and young entrepreneurs discussed loan applications with staff members who evaluated creditworthiness rather than assumptions about who belonged in premium services areas. The wall, where intimidating oil paintings of Heritage Trust's founding fathers had hung, now displayed community testimonials from customers whose businesses had been funded through the Community Investment Fund, their success stories creating a visual narrative of inclusion's economic benefits alongside its moral imperative. Prominent among the testimonials was a framed letter from Maria Gonzalez, whose catering business had grown from a $75,000 loan to a thriving enterprise that employed 12 people and served corporate clients throughout the Dallas region. But the most meaningful display occupied the corner where Isabella Crawford Whitman's office had been located. A memorial case contained Samuel Williams's original 1987 loan application preserved behind glass, alongside contemporary loan approvals that used criteria which would have qualified him for the business capital he had been denied. The inscription read, "In memory of dreams deferred in honor of justice, served in commitment to dignity for all." Valeria stood before her father's loan application, reading his handwritten business plan for a small cleaning service that had included financial projections, market analysis, and employment goals that demonstrated entrepreneurial vision decades ahead of its time. The denial letter attached to his application bore the signature of an assistant manager whose reasoning was summarized in 4 words. "Applicant lacks appropriate background." "He would have succeeded," Valeria said quietly, addressing Miguel but speaking to her father's memory. Every projection he made was conservative. His market analysis was accurate. His financial planning was sound. The only thing he lacked was someone willing to look beyond their assumptions about what success looked like. Miguel nodded, understanding that Heritage Trust's transformation was personal as well as institutional, rooted in generational pain that had found its resolution through corporate authority wielded with surgical precision. "Dr. Richmond, we've approved 17 similar business plans in the past month. Your father's criteria are now our standard for evaluating entrepreneurial potential rather than social position." Rachel Torres approached with a quarterly report that documented changes measurable in statistics but rooted in daily choices by employees who had learned to see customers as individuals rather than representatives of demographic categories they had been trained to exclude. "Dr. Richmond, I wanted to share some numbers that I think would make your father proud." The report showed loan approval rates for minority entrepreneurs that had increased 300% while maintaining identical credit standards, demonstrating that discriminatory practices had excluded qualified customers rather than protecting institutional interests. Customer satisfaction ratings among all demographic categories had reached record levels, proving that dignified service improved business relationships across every population Heritage Trust served. But the most meaningful change was attitudinal rather than statistical. Staff members who had once calculated complex social hierarchies to determine appropriate service levels now focused on understanding customer needs and providing solutions that built long-term banking relationships. The energy that Isabella Crawford Whitman had devoted to sophisticated exclusion was redirected toward genuine customer service that created economic opportunities for both clients and Heritage Trust. Valeria walked to the window where she had been forced to wait on March 15th, looking out at the Dallas skyline where her father had driven his sanitation route for 37 years, while dreaming of businesses he would never be allowed to build. The view hadn't changed, but everything it represented had been transformed through institutional reconstruction that proved procedures could evolve when confronted by people with both the power and determination to demand change, Mr. Santos, Valeria said, turning from the window with a smile that carried satisfaction earned through decades of building alternative procedures that finally had the power to replace discriminatory institutions. I'm proud of what Heritage Trust has become. More importantly, I'm grateful for leaders who understood that real change requires daily commitment to principles rather than quarterly adjustments to procedures. The conversation continued for 47 minutes, reviewing progress reports, discussing expansion of community investment programs, and planning employee recognition ceremonies for staff members who had embraced inclusion with enthusiasm that transformed Heritage Trust's culture from the inside out. But the most meaningful exchange occurred when Miguel shared a letter from Carmen Rodriguez's granddaughter, a college sophomore studying business who had written to thank Heritage Trust for becoming the kind of institution where her family felt welcomed and respected. She wants to intern here next summer, Miguel explained, his voice carrying pride that extended beyond corporate accomplishment to personal transformation. She said Heritage Trust is proof that change is possible when people choose courage over comfort. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the lobby, Valeria Richmond prepared to leave an institution that had been transformed by the consequences of mistaking her appearance for her authority. The Heritage Trust Bank that had denied her father's dreams in 1987 no longer existed, replaced by an institution that honored his memory through daily practices that ensured other dreamers would receive the opportunity and respect that had been denied to previous generations. The personal legacy was complete, but its impact would continue through every customer interaction, every loan application, and every moment when Heritage Trust employees chose dignity over discrimination, proving that institutional change was possible when individual courage met corporate authority in pursuit of justice that arrived decades later than it should have, but exactly when it could do the most good. 6 months after the morning that redefined Heritage Trust Bank's understanding of power privilege and proper customer service, Dr. Valeria Richmond returned to 2847 Prosperity Boulevard, carrying the same leather portfolio, but entering an institution that had been transformed so completely that even its marble floors seemed to welcome footsteps that had once been judged unworthy of premium services. The September sun streamed through tall windows that no longer illuminated segregated seating areas or intimidating barriers between customers deemed appropriate for different levels of service. Instead, the light revealed an open floor plan where families of all backgrounds conducted business with equal attention, where elderly customers received patient assistance regardless of their appearance, and where young entrepreneurs discussed loan applications with staff members trained to evaluate potential rather than prejudice. Miguel Santos emerged from his office with genuine warmth that reflected 6 months of leadership discovery, understanding that creating inclusion was more rewarding and more profitable than maintaining exclusion. His quarterly performance reviews showed customer satisfaction ratings that had broken every previous Heritage Trust record while generating loan origination numbers that exceeded corporate targets by margins that proved discrimination had been expensive as well as immoral. Dr. Richmond, welcome home. Miguel said the word choice deliberate and meaningful. Heritage Trust had become a place where she belonged, not because of her wealth or authority, but because it had learned to welcome everyone with the dignity her father had been denied 39 years earlier. The transformation was visible in every detail, from the community investment wall displaying success stories of businesses funded through Valeria's $50 million initiative to the customer service training certificates that lined the teller area to the suggestion box that had replaced the bronze plaque marking premium services for appropriate clientele. But the most meaningful change occupied the memorial corner where Samuel Williams's 1987 loan application was displayed alongside contemporary approvals that used criteria which would have qualified him for the business capital his entrepreneurial vision deserved. Fresh flowers replaced weekly by staff members who had never met him but understood his legacy, honored a man whose dreams had been deferred, but whose daughter had ensured they would never be denied again. Mrs. Carmen Rodriguez approached with her granddaughter Maria, a college junior studying business administration, who had chosen her major after witnessing institutional transformation that proved change was possible when courage confronted established power. Dr. Richmond, I wanted Maria to meet the woman who made sure my granddaughter will never see what I witnessed in March. Maria Rodriguez offered a firm handshake and direct eye contact that reflected confidence earned through watching her grandmother's dignity validated by institutional change that had arrived through individual determination. Dr. Richmond, I'm writing my senior thesis on stakeholder accountability in financial services. Heritage Trust is my primary case study for how institutions can transform discriminatory practices into inclusive policies. The conversation revealed changes that extended beyond Heritage Trust's walls, with Maria's research documenting similar transformations at banks throughout Dallas that had implemented policy reviews to avoid the viral accountability that had reshaped Heritage Trust in real time. The ripple effects of one morning's confrontation with sophisticated discrimination had influenced industry practices across the Southwest region. Brittany Walsh, now a senior customer service representative whose performance evaluations consistently ranked among Heritage Trust's highest, approached to share appreciation for leadership that had taught her to recognize customer potential rather than social position. Dr. Richmond, I wanted to thank you for helping me become better at my job. Treating everyone with respect is actually easier than trying to figure out who deserves what level of service. The simplicity of her realization reflected a broader cultural shift that had replaced complex calculations of social hierarchy with straightforward commitments to professional service that improved working relationships while generating superior business results. Staff members who had once devoted energy to sophisticated exclusion now focused on understanding customer needs and providing solutions that built long-term banking relationships beneficial to both clients and Heritage Trust. Rachel Torres presented the 6-month Community Impact Report, documenting measurable progress that translated individual accountability into institutional transformation. The Community Investment Fund had approved 127 loans totaling $23.7 million, creating 340 jobs and generating $47.2 million in economic activity within previously underserved Dallas neighborhoods. The financial literacy programs had served over 400 participants, with 73% reporting improved credit scores and 41% successfully applying for additional banking services. But the statistics only hinted at personal transformations that occurred when institutions chose inclusion over exclusion. Heritage Trust had become a place where Maria Gonzalez could expand her catering business, where Michael Thompson could open his auto repair shop, where Sandra Kim could launch her graphic design studio, and where dozens of other entrepreneurs could build wealth within communities that had been excluded from traditional banking relationships. The Memorial Corner attracted daily visitors, customers, who paused to read Samuel Williams's business plan and understand how institutional bias had denied opportunity to qualified entrepreneurs whose only deficiency was appearing different from loan officers' expectations. Many left flowers notes or small donations to the Community Investment Fund, creating an organic memorial to dreams deferred but ultimately honored through comprehensive institutional change. As afternoon light created dancing patterns across the marble floors, Valeria Richmond stood where she had been forced to wait 6 months earlier, looking around a lobby that had been transformed from a symbol of exclusion to a model of institutional inclusion that was attracting attention from financial institutions across the nation. The Heritage Trust Bank that had dismissed her in March no longer existed, replaced by an institution that proved her father's faith in American possibility was correct, even when individual Americans failed to live up to those possibilities. The change was permanent, measurable, and meaningful, ensuring that Samuel Williams' granddaughter would enter these doors with dignity rather than having to fight for respect that should never have been conditional. The digital documentation of March 15th's confrontation with institutional discrimination had evolved far beyond its original social media platforms, becoming a case study in how individual courage combined with technological amplification could create accountability that forced institutional change within hours rather than decades. 6 months later, the viral legacy continued expanding through channels that transformed one morning's documentation into a national conversation about dignity, justice, and the power of witnesses to create consequences for prejudice. James Murphy's original Instagram livestream had accumulated over 2.3 million views with saved recordings shared across every major social media platform and translated into 12 languages by viewers who recognized universal themes of discrimination and accountability. His tech entrepreneur Dallas account had grown to 340,000 followers as he continued documenting positive changes at Heritage Trust alongside similar transformations at other Dallas institutions, creating a platform for celebrating progress while maintaining pressure for continued improvement. The viral documentation had generated unexpected opportunities for James with speaking engagements at business conferences, where he discussed the responsibility of witnesses to document discrimination and the power of social media to create real-time accountability for institutional prejudice. His testimony before a congressional subcommittee on financial services discrimination was viewed over 800,000 times, establishing him as a national advocate for transparency and customer service across all industries. Sarah Jensen's TikTok documentation had surpassed 5.7 million views, with duets and stitches by creators across the country sharing their own experiences of banking discrimination while celebrating Heritage Trust's transformation as proof that change was possible when accountability met authority. Her content had evolved into a diversity and inclusion consulting business that worked with corporations throughout Texas to identify and eliminate discriminatory practices before they could generate legal liability or public relations disasters. The hashtags generated by the original documentation continued trending periodically as news events reminded social media users of Heritage Trust's transformation with hashtag banking justice and hashtag heritage accountability becoming shorthand for institutional change achieved through viral documentation rather than traditional legal or regulatory processes. The terms had entered academic discourse, with university professors using Heritage Trust as an example of how digital democracy could create consequences for discrimination that legal procedures had historically failed to address adequately. Netflix had acquired documentary rights to the story, with production beginning on a feature-length film that would examine how 6 months of institutional transformation occurred through daily choices by employees who had learned to prioritize inclusion over exclusion. The documentary team conducted interviews with Miguel Santos, Rachel Torres, and other Heritage Trust staff members whose careers had been transformed by learning that dignified customer service was more rewarding than sophisticated discrimination. The academic impact extended beyond business schools to sociology departments, where Heritage Trust became a case study in how institutional change could occur rapidly when individual accountability was combined with corporate authority and public pressure. Research papers examined the viral documentation as evidence that social media could create democratic oversight of institutional behavior, forcing changes that traditional regulatory processes had failed to achieve. Harvard Business School's case study, When Accountability Meets Authority. Institutional change, through stakeholder intervention, was downloaded over 45,000 times by professors incorporating Heritage Trust's transformation into curricula across multiple disciplines. The case study examined how Valeria Richmond's intervention demonstrated that meaningful change required both individual courage and institutional power, with viral documentation serving as the catalyst that made rapid transformation possible. International attention came from banking institutions across Europe and Asia, where Heritage Trust's transformation was studied as a model for addressing discriminatory practices through shareholder accountability, rather than regulatory enforcement. The European Banking Authority cited Heritage Trust's changes as evidence that market-based solutions could achieve anti-discrimination goals more quickly than traditional government oversight. But the most significant viral legacy was personal, rather than institutional, visible in comment sections where viewers shared their own experiences of discrimination alongside celebrations of courage demonstrated by witnesses who had documented injustice rather than remaining silent bystanders. Thousands of people credited the Heritage Trust documentation with inspiring them to speak up when they witnessed similar discrimination, creating a cultural shift toward active intervention rather than passive observation. The viral documentation had generated a new understanding of witness responsibility, with viewers recognizing that smartphones created opportunities and obligations to document discrimination that previous generations had been forced to endure without evidence or accountability. Comment threads became spaces for sharing strategies for effective documentation, legal rights of witnesses, and techniques for supporting discrimination victims while maintaining personal safety. Corporate communications departments across multiple industries developed social media monitoring procedures designed to identify potential discrimination incidents before they could generate viral accountability. The Heritage Trust transformation had demonstrated that discriminatory practices could become corporate liability within hours if documented and shared effectively, forcing preventive measures that prioritized improved customer service over crisis management. The viral legacy extended to legislative discussions with state representatives, citing Heritage Trust's transformation as evidence that market accountability could address discrimination more effectively than government regulation alone. The documentation had become part of congressional testimony about banking discrimination, federal oversight of customer service practices, and the role of social media in creating democratic accountability for institutional behavior. 6 months after Sarah Jensen whispered Dallas friends, "I need y'all to witness this," into her phone, her documentation had influenced banking practices across the Southwest, inspired federal legislation, and created a template for using viral attention to generate institutional accountability that traditional advocacy had struggled to achieve. The viral legacy was permanent, archived across platforms where future generations could study how individual courage, technological amplification, and corporate authority combined to transform an institution within 6 months, proving that dramatic change was possible when discrimination met accountability in real time. As afternoon shadows lengthened across Heritage Trust Bank's transformed lobby, the story that began with sophisticated discrimination and ended with comprehensive accountability offered lessons that extended far beyond banking, far beyond Dallas, and far beyond any single institution's journey from exclusion to inclusion. The universal message emerged not from corporate policy or legal precedent, but from the simple recognition that dignity should never depend on appearance, wealth, or anyone else's assumption about who deserves respect. To every person who has ever been dismissed because their appearance didn't match someone else's expectations about success, Heritage Trust's transformation proves that patience and persistence can overcome institutional prejudice when combined with individual courage and technological accountability. Valeria Richmond's quiet confidence during 20 minutes of sophisticated discrimination demonstrates that maintaining dignity under pressure creates more powerful responses than anger or confrontation ever could. To every witness who has observed discrimination while struggling with the choice between intervention and safety, the viral documentation that forced Heritage Trust's transformation shows that modern technology has created new obligations and opportunities for creating accountability. James Murphy's decision to document injustice rather than remain a silent bystander proves that individual choices to record and share discrimination can generate consequences that protect future victims while forcing institutional change. To every employee working within institutions that maintain discriminatory practices through policy procedure and unspoken expectations, Miguel Santos's transformation from complicit bystander to inclusive leader demonstrates that individuals can choose courage over comfort when leadership supports dignity over discrimination. His success in rebuilding Heritage Trust's culture proves that inclusion generates better business results than exclusion, while creating more rewarding work environments for everyone involved. To every person with authority over institutional policies, hiring practices, or customer service standards, Valeria Richmond's intervention demonstrates that power carries responsibility for ensuring that procedures serve everyone, rather than privileging selected populations based on appearance, background, or social position. Her ability to transform Heritage Trust within hours rather than years proves that meaningful change requires commitment from people with actual authority, rather than symbolic gestures from those without power to implement solutions. The Heritage Trust story offers hope for everyone who has been told they don't belong, don't deserve respect, or don't look like what success should look like. It proves that institutions can change rapidly when confronted by people with both the courage to demand change and the authority to implement it. The transformation demonstrates that discriminatory practices are expensive mistakes rather than profitable strategies costing institutions money while creating legal liability and public relations disasters that viral documentation can generate within hours. But the universal message extends beyond individual empowerment to collective responsibility, recognizing that discrimination persists because too many people choose silence over solidarity, comfort over courage, and assumption over investigation. Heritage Trust's transformation required individual accountability from Valeria Richmond, viral documentation from James Murphy and Sarah Jensen, and institutional support from Miguel Santos and Rachel Torres. Change happened because multiple people chose action over inaction when confronted with institutional injustice. The story reminds every viewer that discrimination doesn't always announce itself with crude language or obvious hostility. Sometimes it hides behind policy procedure and polite phrases that exclude while appearing to serve. Sometimes it operates through sophisticated procedures that create plausible deniability while achieving discriminatory results. Heritage Trust's transformation teaches recognition of institutional bias regardless of how professionally it's packaged or how politely it's delivered. To parents raising children in a world where appearance still influences opportunity, Heritage Trust's transformation offers concrete evidence that change is possible when people choose inclusion over exclusion, courage over comfort, and dignity over discrimination. The memorial to Samuel Williams demonstrates that individual dreams deferred can become institutional transformations that ensure future generations receive the opportunities their ancestors were denied. To educators, policymakers, and community leaders working to address inequality, Heritage Trust provides a model for rapid institutional change that bypasses traditional regulatory processes through direct accountability between stakeholders and institutions. The transformation proves that market-based solutions combined with social media documentation can create consequences for discrimination while generating positive changes that benefit everyone involved. The universal message concludes with a question rather than an answer. What will you do the next time you witness injustice? Your choice to document, share, speak up, or remain silent will determine whether discrimination continues or whether accountability forces the kind of change that transformed Heritage Trust Bank from a symbol of exclusion to a model of institutional inclusion. Because Heritage Trust's transformation began with one person refusing to accept discriminatory treatment, continued with witnesses choosing documentation over silence, and succeeded through leadership that prioritized dignity over profit margins. Your decision to follow their example could create the next transformation, protect the next victim, and prove that individual courage combined with collective action can reshape any institution willing to choose inclusion over exclusion. The story ends where it began, with the recognition that every person deserves respect, regardless of their appearance, background, or anyone else's assumptions about who belongs where. Heritage Trust Bank learned that lesson the hard way, but they learned it completely, and their transformation offers hope that any institution can evolve when confronted by people determined to create a world where dignity is universal rather than conditional. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Heritage Trust Bank's Memorial Corner, where fresh flowers surrounded Samuel Williams's preserved loan application and created a quiet space for reflection that had become sacred to everyone who understood how institutional bias could destroy dreams, while institutional change could honor memory through daily action. Dr. Valeria Richmond stood before her father's handwritten business plan, reading his projections for a cleaning service that would have employed 12 people and generated enough revenue to send his daughter to college without the student loans that had shaped her early career. The numbers were conservative, the market analysis accurate, and the financial planning sound. The only deficiency had been appearing before loan officers who couldn't see past their assumptions about who deserved opportunity. "Daddy," she whispered to the glass case that preserved his application alongside contemporary loan approvals that used criteria which would have qualified him for the business capital his entrepreneurial vision deserved. "We changed the rules. Samuel Williams would get his loan today, and his daughter wouldn't have to buy the bank to make sure it happened." The memorial had attracted visitors from across Dallas, customers who paused to understand how one man's denied dreams had become the catalyst for institutional transformation that ensured other dreamers would receive opportunities their predecessors were denied. Many left flowers notes expressing gratitude for changes that extended far beyond Heritage Trust, or small donations to the Community Investment Fund that continued Samuel Williams's legacy through supporting entrepreneurs whose only crime was looking different from traditional expectations about success. Miguel Santos approached with the quarterly impact report documenting how Samuel Williams's memorial had inspired Heritage Trust employees to exceed every target for inclusive customer service, while generating business results that proved discrimination had been expensive as well as immoral. Dr. Richmond, your father's legacy has touched every person who works here. We understand that dignity isn't just good policy, it's good business. The numbers confirmed what daily experience had demonstrated: treating customers with respect, regardless of their appearance, generated better relationships, increased customer loyalty, and produced superior financial results compared to the sophisticated exclusion that had characterized Heritage Trust's previous culture. Samuel Williams's memorial had become a daily reminder that inclusive service honored memory while building prosperity. Rachel Torres shared letters from community members whose businesses had been funded through the Community Investment Fund, their success stories creating an expanding network of entrepreneurs who understood that Heritage Trust's transformation had made their dreams possible. Dr. Richmond, we've proven that your father's faith in American opportunity was correct even when individual Americans failed to live up to those possibilities. The letters revealed transformations that extended beyond individual businesses to entire neighborhoods, where Heritage Trust's community investment had created jobs, generated tax revenue, and demonstrated that inclusive banking practices could rebuild communities that had been excluded from traditional financial services. Samuel Williams's legacy lived through every job created, every family supported, and every dream realized through institutional change that honored his memory. As evening light created dancing patterns across the marble floors, Valeria Richmond prepared to leave an institution that had been transformed by understanding the cost of discrimination and the value of inclusion. Heritage Trust Bank had become living proof that institutions could evolve rapidly when confronted by people with both the courage to demand change and the authority to implement it. The final legacy frame captured Heritage Trust's transformation in Samuel Williams's own words, preserved at the bottom of his 1987 loan application. "This business will succeed because every customer deserves respect, every employee deserves opportunity, and every community deserves institutions that serve everyone rather than selected populations." His vision had been correct, his projections accurate, and his values sound. The only thing missing in 1987 was an institution willing to look beyond assumptions about who deserved opportunity. 39 years later, his daughter had ensured that Heritage Trust would never again confuse appearance with ability, prejudice with policy, or exclusion with excellence. The memorial inscription, updated to include his own words, now read, "Samuel Williams, 1950 to 2008. Every customer deserves respect, every employee deserves opportunity, and every community deserves institutions that serve everyone." His vision became our mission. His dream became our reality. His legacy became our daily commitment to dignity for all. Dr. Valeria Richmond walked through Heritage Trust's revolving doors for the final time as a customer seeking justice, but returned whenever necessary as a stakeholder, ensuring that change remained permanent, meaningful, and measurable. Samuel Williams's dream had been deferred, but never destroyed, and his daughter had made certain it would never be denied again. The story ended where it began, with the understanding that every person deserves respect, every dream deserves consideration, and every institution has the choice between perpetuating discrimination or creating inclusion. Heritage Trust. Bank had learned to choose correctly, and their transformation offered hope that any institution could evolve when courage confronted prejudice with the authority to demand change. Samuel Williams would have been proud. His daughter had built the bank he would have wanted to enter, and his grandchildren would inherit a world where dignity was universal rather than conditional, where dreams were evaluated on merit rather than appearance, and where institutions served everyone rather than selected populations. The legacy was complete, permanent and powerful, proving that individual courage combined with institutional authority could transform any procedure willing to choose inclusion over exclusion, dignity over discrimination, and justice over prejudice. If you've ever been told you don't belong, if you've ever been dismissed because of how you look, if you've ever watched discrimination happen in silence, this story is for you. Share it not just for awareness, but for action. Because the next person who needs courage might be you, and the next institution that needs changing might be the one where you work bank or simply exist as a human being deserving of dignity. Your voice matters. Your story matters. Your dignity is non-negotiable. And sometimes when you stand up with quiet strength instead of loud anger, you create change that echoes for generations. Don't forget to like this video if it moved you. Subscribe to this channel because we're building a community that believes respect should be universal. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, the next time you witness injustice, your choice to document it, speak up, or stay silent will determine whether discrimination continues or whether accountability creates the change our world desperately needs. Because dignity isn't a privilege. It's a promise we make to each other one story at a time. Until next time, choose courage, choose justice, and never forget that your actions matter more than you know.